Welcome to The Peasants Are Revolting, the series where a dyslexic man reads some boring shit so you don't have to. What I'll be talking about today is something that became more and more intriguing and more irrelevant, until I read the actual text itself and then fell asleep. But that could be down to the half bottle of wine and few cans I was drinking while looking into it. When I first heard about this text, it was described as the first organised strike in recorded history. Then I looked in more and it was actually a poem. Then I looked in further and it turned out to be the first use of state propaganda. So I looked in further but couldn't see the writing because by that stage I was too close to the computer screen. After standing back but considering it more, it became a barometer for how you see the world. Then came the obvious question, what is it then? Well, as far as I can see, it's all of those things. It's known as Ipuwer Papyrus, and it honestly should be mandatory for anyone who has an interest in how the state operates. So first off, what does Ipuwer mean? Well, it's a name that's common in ancient Egypt, but the Ipuwer in question is the main character of our text, and to understand what he's saying, you have to understand what time he lived in. Also, do bear in mind that I'm more than likely pronouncing his name wrong, but my way of working is I'll keep saying it wrong, and if anyone questions me, I'll just say it louder. This is known as the English person abroad method. So what time did this person live in then? Well, nobody knows. Nobody even knows if Ipuwer is a real person. But what we do know is that it was written no earlier than 1250 BCE. That's before Jesus for you people. And more than likely it was written during the reign of Senusret III, a pharaoh known for his use of propaganda. And that's the important part here, because it's not a question of if this is true or not, because we'll never know. It's a question of if you believe it or not. But to figure that out, we'll have to look at what it is.
So what is it, Mr. Leek?
Short answer, it's a poem. Long answer, it's a long poem. It's quite boring, and by virtue of it being nearly 4,000 years old, some of it is difficult to understand. And what makes it worse is that the end of it has been lost a long time ago, so we'll never know how it ends. People have tried guessing, but unless we find a missing piece or make a time machine, guessing is as useful as having a conversation with someone in a different building, or discussing politics on Twitter. It's pointless and you'll never know if you're right. It goes into the genre of didactic literature, which basically means it attempts to teach you, the reader, a lesson, usually about law and order versus chaos and disarray, where people have forgotten about things like tradition, like what PragerU and Fox News does. The only difference is that Ipuwer is at least kind of interesting. This genre and the genre of national disaster, which it also falls into, were extremely popular in the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, as people had a memory of a time known as the First Intermediate Period, because historians make sexy names. A time that's usually referred to in this text and others at the time as a time where chaos ruled and was generally disastrous. However, this isn't really true. The First Intermediate Period was a time when central government collapsed in the Old Kingdom of Egypt, and regions had to make their own laws, enforce their own customs, and was actually a time of great cultural progress, as regions would use art to enforce their legitimacy. Workshops were created to train people, and what I found very interesting is that statues of figures drawn from this time were fatter when compared to the periods surrounding it on each side. All in all, if you want a time to compare it to, it's not that dissimilar to ancient Greece or Renaissance Italy, with its predominance of city-states and artistic and cultural progress. Having said this, there's only one pyramid dated to this time, which you may think is a bad thing until you consider that pyramids were built using slave labour, and then you realise that saying less pyramids is bad is similar to complaining that cotton production cut down after slavery was abolished in America. Technically you're right, but you sound like a bit of a dick when you say it. So this poem is one of national disaster, where things are turned upside down, the world of old is left in ruins, and it's probably terrible for everyone, right? Well, the versions of national disaster in this poem are things such as, and these are direct quotes by the way, poor men have become owners of wealth, and he who couldn't afford sandals now has money. Noble men are in distress, while the poor are full of joy. Every town says, let us oppress the powerful among us. The doorkeeper says, let us plunder who we guard. The washerman refuses to carry his load. No man wears white clothes anymore. Barbarians from abroad have come to Egypt. Gold, lapis lazuli, I don't know what that is by the way, I think it's a stone. Silver, turquoise, carnelian, amherst and ibis stone are strung across the necks of maidservants. A girl who didn't even have a box now has furniture. A girl who used to look at her face in the water now has a mirror, while one rich man is now in rags. It sounds more and more like a press release from the Tories by the minute. It sounds like an internal monologue of a Jacob Rees-Mogg nightmare. The nightmare before Mogmas. And what's the result of all this? The desert is throughout the land, which wouldn't be like Egypt, would it? And the river is blood, which sounds bad until you realise that the Nile turns a distinct red when it floods, and in a desert, flooding is generally a welcome thing. They probably did kill people though, I'm not saying they didn't. Just, there's been murder in history, that's what I'm saying. But one of the most intriguing lines, I feel, is this: Elephantine and Tinus of Upper Egypt, without paying taxes onto civil strife, were lacking grain, fruit and wood. The work of craftsmen are the profits of the palace. To what purpose is a treasury without its revenue? Which is quite profound for the opposite way that they thought, because what can a state do without money? And how can they get money if an area declines to pay taxes because the state has broken the social contract of feeding or protecting its people? So then, when all this is added together and read in order, it becomes a story of revolt, where the workers started making their own things for themselves instead of the king, where areas who didn't get enough food stopped paying taxes, where pharaohs' tombs were being desecrated by the people who were forced to make them, and the upper classes have all but been removed. And this is apparently the chaos bit of the poem. It sounds pretty nice to me, but then again, I'm a eat the rich, burn the banks, bleeding heart lefty. But as good old Ipuwer goes on to say, he wants this to stop, so he asks the Lord of all, who could either be the sun god Ra, who has big support in Ireland, strangely enough. Every pub I go into has up to Ra written somewhere on it, or the Pharaoh. But seeing as pharaohs are mediators between the gods and the people, that it makes little difference. And he wants them to remember his religious duties and kill his enemies and restore Ma'at, which means order. So religious duty in those days involved upholding the class system and taking it out on anyone who rebelled against it. Thank God things have changed, huh? So then this becomes a story where the lower classes and slaves take power for themselves, devolve the central government, see an increase in living standards in some kind of Egyptian Marxist wet dream, and the main character wants to bring an end to this and restore the empire, and wants to put a strongman pharaoh on the throne who will smite his enemies who rose up against him a long, long time ago in a place far, far away. Wait, where did I hear all this before? So what I'm getting at here is that Ipuwer Papyrus, one of the oldest surviving national disaster and paper documents, is the Egyptian version of Star Wars. Some things in it may very well be true, such as a revolt that caused the class system to change, but due to lack of evidence, we don't really know when, where, or even if that happened. But what we do know is that the document itself was written during the Pharaoh's reign, who liked propaganda and had a vested interest in making a time where he didn't have power look terrible, which, whatever the reality, has been the tactic of dictators, emperors, monarchs, governments, all forms of statism ever since, really. So whatever can be said about it, it is an example of early state propaganda, and its styles, tactics and uses are still very relevant to this day. It can be a story where traditional values are gone, which leads to less massive projects like pyramids, or it's a story of rebellion by the same people who built those pyramids, and that when the workers unite, their lives improve. And whichever way you choose basically can show how you see the world. But regardless of all else, it's still a story that's being told to this day. Thanks again. I hope you enjoyed, or at least found it interesting. I certainly did, but then again, I'm into all this kind of stuff. If you'd like to read further about it, I will put links in the comments. And if you like it, please like, comment, subscribe, or just share it around or tell someone. I've been
The Anarchist Leek.
and the peasants are revolting.
Next time I'll see you and